Hi, welcome. What can I get for you?
How many kids do you have? I've got
It's mustard. Oh, that's so good to hear.
The population of London, Ontario is
Oh, I'm
about
sorry. I wanted to
383,800.
We started about 6 months ago. Like you've lost a lot. Hey, I love what you did. Good job. Yeah, catch up.
I was ready this time. You know, a couple years ago, Jeff Foxworthy, he decided he wanted to make a TV show, and it was a show aimed at reminding us just how little we really do know. I don't know if you remember the show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Many of you probably watched the show thinking, there's no way, oh my goodness, how did that fifth grader know that? Like, this is the cream of the crop fifth grader. Like, I've hung out with fifth graders. There's no way they know that, right? Like, many of us, we've walked through that. And so I want to just give you a chance to see just how smart you really are. Is that okay? Well, let's just end a little nostalgia. Let's see how smart you really are. Okay. What white puffy clouds are known as Fairweather Clouds? Cumulus, cumulonimbus, or stratus? I'm not smarter than a fifth grader. Anybody think it's this buzz? Okay, I see a bunch of A's in the crowd. Let's see, is it A? Well done. You see, y'all are smarter than the average bears. I like it. Let's just test the waters just a little bit more. How about this one? If Trey is facing north and he turns 90 to his right, what direction is he now facing? Obviously, it's not north, but is it south, east, or west? Man, I love this. You guys are smarter than the average upstreeter. This is incredible. Let's see. What do you think? East, B. I think I heard B. Right? Like, you facing north, you turn 90 degrees to your right. Isn't that right? Okay, just checking. I saw some looks like, he's wrong. And I'm like, I think I got it right. Like, I just Googled it, all right? Like, maybe Jeff Foxworthy's wrong. I did a little research just to make sure what cumulus was, because I didn't want somebody to come and ask me after the fact, I'm like, it's a white feathery crown. Anyway, let's do one. I actually got the chance to read this. This is one of my boy's books that he has. It's not the full book, but it's the illustrated version. The classic Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Real Princess, is better known as The Princess and the Bride, Frog, or Pea? Is it C? Who would have thought? The Princess and the Pea. Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, so now it is story time with Scott. Today no, just kidding. We're not going to go there. You know, isn't it funny how the show reminded us, it kind of showed us as a culture that there are things that we don't know. In fact, it at times is humiliating because we're watching these fifth graders, these 10 and 11-year-olds that have the right answer. And I'm sitting there thinking, there's no way. Like, I don't even know that I know how to spell that word. I'm looking at it. I can't pronounce it. Like, what is wrong? And we're faced with this reality as we watch the show. It's quite humiliating that we just don't know everything. Have you ever been faced with that conclusion? I mean, you want to put up a good front, especially if you have a teenage boy or girl. You want to put up a good front, and you want to think, hey, you might think you know everything, but I am your mama. I am your daddy. I do. And there's this clash, right? Or maybe it's because you have toddlers, or maybe it's because you're in college and you're trying to be smarter than the professor. Are you smarter than a professor? I will show you, right? Like, we walk into these scenarios where we do not know everything. And it can be a little bit humiliating at times. In fact, let's let's take it a step further. I've got this circle on the screen. It's a pretty little blue circle, right? Imagine that this circle right here represents all of human knowledge and understanding. It represents everything you could know. It represents everything that you as an individual, that you as a leader, that you as a male, female, you from Africa, from Europe, from Australia, from Texas. It represents everything that you can know based upon your experiences, based upon your upbringing, based upon your own understandings, based upon what you've read, what you've studied. Imagine that this circle has every ounce of knowledge that you could obtain. I want you to think for a second. What percentage of this pie do you know? What percentage of this pie do you have an understanding of? Maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, I think I know about 50% of all that there is to know. And if that's you, I applaud you. I need to hang out with you, right? Like maybe you're sitting here thinking, maybe I know a quarter of what's going on. Maybe I know like 10%, or maybe you're sitting in here thinking like, I don't even know that my sliver would even show up on that pie graph. Just being honest, right? So what I want us to talk about today is I coming to grip this circle and this understanding. I want us to think about for a few moments, what do we do with the people that know things that we don't know? Better yet, what does it look like to genuinely love people? The people that maybe are outside of your understanding or outside of your realm of influence. What does it look like to genuinely love people? Because it's easy for us, and we would all agree, it's easy for us to love the people that agree with us, that share the opinions that we do, that look like us, that have the same stage of life as us. It's easy for us to love the people that we come in contact with regularly and we choose to love, but what does it look like to love the other people? And at the core of what it means to be for North Tarrant. In fact, many of you have seen this moniker. We've had stickers about it. If you went to Food Truck Friday, we had Frisbees that were all about for North Tarrant. At the core of this idea, at the core of being for North Tarrant, brings us to this reality that we are loving those around us. It comes from a very crazy yet very simple statement that Jesus made. Jesus, who I really believe embodied love. Jesus, one that went around and really showed us an incredible new ethic of how we can love, what we can do to be loved, what we can do in the midst of struggles and hurdles. Jesus rallies the troops and he says, hey guys, let me tell you something really quickly. Here's the deal. I was just asked, and he constantly was being asked, what's the greatest command? What's this look like? And one of the times, this very smart individual came up and said, hey, Jesus, I want to put you in a corner. What is the greatest command? And he comes back, and he, without even thinking, really, he's like, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, the key component to this is loving others and loving God. And yet if I was in that moment, I'm probably thinking, okay, Jesus, I think I got this loving others thing down, but what does it really mean to love God? Like, how can I love God? Can you just show me what it means to love God? Like, is there a recipe maybe? Is there like a checklist to make sure that I've got it all down and I'm loving God right? And in one of his parting statements, he brings the guys in. He's like, hey, fellas, come here. And if this was you, I imagine if Jesus was calling to you, saying, hey, lean in for a second. I've got a few final words I want to share with you. You know how you've been struggling with defining what does it mean to love God? Let me make it real simple. You want to know what it means to love God? Love my children. You want to know what it means to love me? You know what it means to love God? I want you to take care of and to love those with which I value. I want you to be one that loves regardless. Wait, what? He says, I want this to be what you are known by. As a follower of Jesus, I want you to be known by the way you love. But isn't it difficult at times to love? I mean, what does it really look like to love people. And we go back to this circle here, right? I mean, imagine this is the circle of all knowledge. This is the circle of every understanding, everything anybody could grasp. And I know you are an incredibly smart audience. And here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to assume that we in here know 8%. Right? I mean, 8% of all knowledge. You're thinking, man, you undersold me big time. I'm like, I'm in the crowd too, so we're taking the average. All right? So imagine you've got down 8%. What does it look like to love the other 92? What does it really look like? Love the 92% that maybe don't quite understand. Maybe you don't quite agree with them. How do we handle that? For me, when I think about this, here's a question. What does it look like to love someone when we just don't understand their opinions, their words, or their actions? There's times that I'm sitting here and I'm looking at somebody and I'm processing, like, how could you think that way? Now, you've probably never thought of that. You're sitting there in a conversation and you're just scratching your head. Like, what is it that brought you to this conclusion? There's opinions that we just don't understand. Or maybe, take it even a step further, what does it look like to love someone when we don't agree with their opinions, their words, or their actions? What does it look like to love? Like, legitimately, what does that look like in our sphere of influence? For me, as an Aggie, you know, sometimes I tend to criticize other schools, right? I tend to think that there's really only one school that matters. In fact, earlier I had a conversation about if don't tell anybody, but if that school in Austin wanted to pay for my boy's education, I might just wear orange for 4 years, okay? Yeah, I'm an easy sell, right? But I'm just telling you, right? But what does it really mean? I'll never forget. There's a restaurant. You might have heard it. It's called Chipotle, right? I'm probably butchering it. Chipotle, whatever. Did you know that the first time I ever ate a burrito from Chipotle was about a year ago? And here's why. As an Aggie, I just could not understand. I couldn't wrap my mind around this chain burrito place that ran into College Station, because there was this other burrito chain that was growing, that started around the College Station area, and I loved it. Its name was Freebirds. And every single time I would see the new sign, the new burrito place, I would drive by in disdain, right? I'm like, if I walk in there, I'm a traitor. I know, I've got issues. Just this year, I overcame that. But we all have these ideas. Like, I struggle with, what does it look like to love somebody that likes a Chipotle burrito better than a Freebirds burrito? I'm just being real transparent. But even if we go a step further, like, what does it look like to love someone that maybe thinks politically different than you? What does it look like to love someone who's got different ideas or different ideals or different realities? What does it look like to love someone that parents different than you? We're faced with this idea of, what does it look like to truly love? What does it look like to genuinely get into the trenches? Because when we look at the life of Jesus, Jesus embodied this. When you really go, and I would encourage you to go back and read the biographies of Jesus. Matthew and Mark and Luke and John did an incredible job of documenting, of eyewitnessing the life of Jesus and writing it down so that we have it in form and fashion, that we can go into it and read about it. But as you look at the life of Jesus, the love that he showed was just remarkable. People that probably I wouldn't have gotten along with, Jesus walks over and picks them up and says, hey, follow me. People that, if I was going to be real honest with you, I would have never hung out with them in high school. And yet Jesus identifies them and says, you, I love you. I'm for you. You're forgiven. Now stand up. Follow me. And yet, so many times, if I'm going to be honest, I aspire to be this religious giant, right? Like, I want to learn as much as I can, and I want to be a good pastor that when I jump into an Uber car, I can, like, wow the driver with my incredible knowledge of things theological, right? That's good. You know, those are the people throughout the course of the Bible, throughout the course of Jesus' life, that he tended to be harder on and he tended to be harsher with. He tended to love those that were struggling, that were down and out. And when I really look at this idea of what does it look like, what does it mean to be for North Tarrant, it bottles itself down into this reality that what does it look like to love? Period. Not what does it look like to love those that I love, but what does it look like to love? Period. You know, last week we talked about this guy named Saul who became Paul. Saul had this incredible encounter, and to such a degree that he went from basically prosecuting and trying to prevent the spread of this Jesus guy to this, to promoting, to pushing, to going around and saying, this Jesus, I know I used to be really hard. I know I used to try to kill. I used to persecute. I used to try to eliminate the followers of Jesus. But let me just be honest with you. I've changed. And I no longer want to push away. I want to help. I want to promote. I want people to see how great Jesus is. So Paul, we're going to walk and look at something he did, which was remarkable. In fact, it takes place in a city named Athens, Greece. Athens was a city at the time that it was a very religious city, if I'm going to be honest. I mean, if you were to walk through the city, there were thousands. I mean, you're looking at probably about 3,000 or more statues, idols, all throughout Athens, because ultimately they wanted to make sure that they got all their gods covered. They had gods for everything. And within the city, when you have so many gods, you can just imagine as you're walking through the city that there are statues everywhere and people making sacrifices to these statues all over the place. I mean, I can just think about you walking through this city of Athens, and it's probably like walking into Hard 8. I mean, it's just everywhere you go, there's people sacrificing animals and bringing and just burning. I'm just kidding. You're going to go to Hard 8 and be like, but they walked into Athens, and everywhere you turned, you were hard-pressed not to see statues or remnants of this religiosity that they lived out. And not only that, but you go into this special little area, what you would call the Areopagus. And within the Areopagus, this was a place where the thought leaders of the day, they were really having these just deep intellectual conversations. Like, this is probably where conspiracy theories were formed in Athens. Like, they're thinking about what could life be like and just talking about it and processing it and thinking and talking and really not doing much good at all, but doing just a lot of talking. And inside the city, you've got these two different groups, or inside the Areopagus, you've got two separate groups. You've got the Epicureans and you've got the Stoics. And the Epicureans were these individuals that they just loved pleasure. Like, their drive in life was, I just want pleasure. Whatever makes me happy, like, that's what makes me happy. Like, I just want to pursue pleasure at all costs. I mean, when you think about the song, It's 5 o'clock somewhere, that's their anthem, all right? But then you go to the Stoics, and they were kind of the antithesis of that. They were the ones who really believed that you had to pursue, that you had to push forward. And they were the ones that really decided that, hey, we need to make statements. We need to think about this, and it's not just about pleasure. There's great sacrifice. There's great thoughts that we need to just push forward and do different things and not just focus on pleasure, but sacrificing ourselves and giving of ourselves and having these great conversations. So in the middle of this Areopagus, you got these two kind of differing worldviews among others, and there's just constantly conversations. And in this scenario walks this guy named Paul, who we talked about last week as Saul, who went from preventing followers of Jesus to really trying to be on the front lines and pushing the name of Jesus. And listen to what happens. It says in Acts chapter 17, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed. In other words, he was hurting, he was struggling, he was walking in and he was just so overwhelmed with anguish as he's walking into the city and knowing what he knows, knowing what's happening, knowing how he has completely given his life over to this individual named Jesus and wants to pursue him and wants people to understand it and follow. He's walking into this city that was full of idols and he was distressed. And it says that a group a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? He walks into to Athens, to Greece, and he's sitting there, and he's trying to have a conversation, and he begins telling them about this newfound reality, how he wants people to follow Jesus. And these Epicureans, these Stoics are looking at him saying, what in the world is he trying to say? What is this babbler? The original translation of this is much like a bird that is just pecking at the ground and never really able to find enough seed to satisfy, but he just constantly is pecking. I mean, you could look at them and say, what is this babbler? What is this bird brain trying to do, trying to say? What is going on? And then others remarked, others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. So Paul's coming in, and they've documented, they've noticed him. What he's saying is something different. He's advocating for foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. They're sitting there listening to this guy go on, thinking, this is weird. Like, he's speaking as if he knows truth, but he is so ignorant. He's a babbler. He's a bird brain. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And in the midst of this, he's just continuing to preach about Jesus and about the good news and about what's going on. So let me ask you this. Imagine you're in Paul's shoes. You walk into a scenario where you've seen and experienced, there are thousands of idols. You're walking into a scenario where you know you are the minority. You know that your understanding, your agreement is probably very less than 8%. How do you respond? What does it look like for you if you're in Paul's shoes and you walk in? And not only do you walk in with a different understanding and a different reality, but the people around you, they're making fun of you. They're calling you bird brain. Maybe they don't call you bird brain, but maybe they go to social media and talk about how big of an idiot you were. Maybe they begin to profess different things or different realities that aren't even true, and they go in and they're telling other people about this, and you're sitting here saying, this can't be, like, I've got to get to the bottom of this. I've got to figure this out. You can't say that about, you don't know the truth. You don't know what's going on. You don't know me. How do we respond? Well, when we're in that situation, it's natural for us to criticize that with which we don't understand or agree with, isn't it? It's natural for us to criticize. It's natural for us to look in the reality and say, you are such a bird brain. Maybe you don't say that, but how do we respond in those moments? How do we respond when we're faced with, oh my goodness, I'm the minority? Or better yet, how do we respond when somebody's on the other side and we're the ones that have the opportunity? It's natural for us to criticize that with which we don't understand or agree with, which means it's unnatural for us not to criticize, which means it's unnatural for us to try to process this. It's unnatural for us to look at this and say, okay, there's got to be a better way. It's natural for us to go on the defense and be like, bam, I'm going for the jugular. We've seen that in relationships. We've seen that in marriages. We want to win. We want to get the upper hand. We want to fight, so what do? We criticize because maybe we don't understand where they're coming from or we don't agree with what they're saying, and so it's easier for us to silence the argument, to throw critical jabs as opposed to stepping back and saying, wait a second, time out. So Paul, rather than being critical in this scenario, he does what is unnatural. Look at what Paul does. He says this, Paul then took up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. I mean, many of us are probably like, I would have said that. Like, you kind of just build them up for a second so that you can just tear them down, right? People of Athens, I see that you are very religious, but, right? I mean, that's what we would say. Hey, I see that you can make a mean cherry pie, but let me tell you where I'm better than you. I see that you... Isn't that what we do oftentimes is we build them up and then we throw in that no offense, right? I mean, no offense, but, and you're like, wait a second, you just preface it with no offense. That means you're about to offend me, right? And so, time out a second. People of Athens, I see that in every way you are religious. But look at what Paul does. 4, as I walked around and looked carefully. He walked into a scenario that he knew that he was the outlier. He knew he was the outskirt. He knew that he was the, not the outskirt, that's like the outside of the city. He walks into the city, out of the outskirts, into the city. And he realizes that he's in the minority. So rather than being critical, he looked carefully. He went around the city. I imagine he probably went around the city looking, observing. What's going on? What can I learn? What can I gain from? Let me ask you questions. Let me ask you ideas. Where you believe this, but can I ask you, what is it in your upbringing that led you to make this conclusion? I can only imagine that Paul, before he goes into the Areopagus, knowing that they are very well-versed and they are very key in on making conversations and probably making people look like idiots, he wanted to look around and do his research. And he says, I look carefully at your objects of worship. And he goes, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you were ignorant. Now, he's not necessarily saying you're a bird brain. He's saying you just basically stated that there might be something out of your recollection. You made an idol to an unknown God, basically stating that there might be a God that I'm just not realizing yet, and so we're going to keep this equation open until we've got finality. You're ignorant. You just don't know. You're making sure you've got all your bases covered, and so there's an ignorance to your understanding of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. He finds an opportunity. He studies. He asks questions. He goes around and tries to figure out, okay, I know 8% of what reality is. There's got to be a good reason around for the 92. There's got to be reason that you are the way. There's got to be reason that you think the way. There's got to be reason that you would actually wear burnt orange. Like, I want to figure out what. Subtle jab. Right? You are sitting here and you don't even know that you've got all the gods. So let me tell you about this unknown God. So Paul begins to talk to them. He begins to tell them about Jesus. He begins to tell them about what happened, using their own philosophies, using their own research, using their own poems. He began to reach into the culture and point the culture back to Jesus. You see, Paul could have very easily been critical. He could have very easily come in and been like, ha, 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 I gotcha. But he didn't. In fact, I would say this, and this is something we can learn. When faced with someone with whom we don't agree or understand, we can choose criticism or curiosity. When faced with something we don't understand, when faced with someone we don't understand or someone that we just don't agree with, someone that we're having trouble with, we have one of two options. We can either be critical of or curious of. And what I've found is that love and criticism are not compatible. When we choose to be critical, what we are doing is we're forsaking love. In fact, what criticism does is it builds walls between. What criticism does is it puts space between. What criticism does is it says, I am better than you, and here's why. And you put a wall between you and the other individual, you and the other people. And when we choose to be critical, it can be death to relationships. When we choose to be critical, it can be devastating to the influence that we have. And one of the things I desire desperately is I want to be a community that is for North Tarrant, that we are a body of people that love. We are a body of people that embrace. We are a body of people that say, hey, you know what? I might not agree with you, but it doesn't mean I can't love you. I might not agree with what you're doing, but it doesn't mean I can't love you. What our culture has done in our social media reality is criticism is quick. And we leave no room for curiosity. What does curiosity do? Curiosity brings people in. Curiosity allows people to know, hey, I love you. I want to know about you. I want to ask questions of what's going on. I want to learn. Paul quickly went into the city and he began to look all over the city to say, okay, what is in here? What can I learn about these people? I don't want to be critical. I want to be curious. I want to learn because I know that as we gain curiosity, we will gain influence. The individual that was sitting there in the Uber car, I hate going back to him, but he was there. And in the midst of his word vomiting, he became very curious and asking me about what we do and what we believe. And he began to sit back and say, wait, that's not what most churches do. Most churches, if you do something wrong, you get the axe and you get pushed out. And if you do something wrong, like there's a God up there that's like vengeance. He's like, ah. And I'm not saying that. I wanted him to know more than anything that God loves him and that God is for him. And so in curiosity, in being curious, it led him to ask me questions as well. You see, curiosity asks questions. One of the things that I love, and many of us, as we begin to be curious, as we begin to curate this reality of how do I be curious, I would encourage you, ask questions, questions, questions. Start the questions with a what, not a why. Why? Because you've been in a scenario where somebody said, why do you believe that? And you know what you do is you begin to be defensive. Right? When somebody comes at you with the why, what do? You put your palms down and you begin to be defensive, like, just because that's the way I was made. What's up to you? We begin to push back when we have the why. But when we ask questions of what, it leads to a curiosity. It leads to you know what? You care about me. You care about me enough to ask about me. And oftentimes when we begin to ask questions of them, you know what happens? They begin to open up. When we begin to ask questions of our colleagues, our coworkers, we disagree with them. They've got a crazy opinion. I just don't understand. But you begin to ask questions of them, and you'll hear things like, you know, you're the first person who asked me a question. You know, the first person that genuinely cared enough about me to find out about me. When we begin to ask the what questions, it opens up the door for the relationship. Because curiosity asks questions, and questions create empathy. Empathy is one of those things as we lean in and we begin to ask questions and learn about and understand and figure out what's behind, figure out what's going on, figure out why they don't want to do church, figure out what's going on the backside, figure out why they think pastors are weird, right? When we begin to ask the questions create empathy. And empathy is something that we can use to lean in, where we can begin to say, okay, I'm going to take the long walk of empathy, and I want to learn what it's like to walk a day in your shoes. I want to learn what's going on the other side. When I'm in the car, empathy is not a real deal. When I'm in the car and I see somebody going slow, I don't have empathy. I'm not curious. Well, right? But empathy is a gateway to love. So what does it look like to be for North Tarrant? What does it genuinely look like to be for North Tarrant? Because I hate to break it to you, when we begin to think about who we are, and we begin to think about the circle of understanding and knowledge that is out there, our piece of the pie is so small. And yet there are so many people that have so many other understandings, so many other backgrounds, so many other experiences, that too often we ask the why question and we push people away rather than engaging, rather than looking carefully like Paul and said, what can we do? What can we do? How can we learn about? How can we be curious of? Because curiosity leads to influence. And if we really want to be for North Tarrant, it is more about the influence we have than the church that we build. If we really want to be for this community, it is more about the influence that we lean into and that we take care of than it is about the facility we're in. So as we wrap the message up, I want to ask you two questions. I'll give you a little homework. Number one is this. It's a question that we've been asking for a while. It's a question that reared its ugly head in the brand new series, but it's this question. What does love require of you? in order for us to live out this thing that Paul did, he walked into a scenario where he was the minority. In order for us to live this out, we need to live that question. What does love require of you? What does it require of you in your marriage? What does it require of you in your job? What does it require of you in your parenting, in your neighborhood? What does love require of you? Because oftentimes when we see somebody we disagree with, the natural reaction is to be critical. The natural reaction is to be like, I know how to put you in your place. But what if we change the natural? And what if we began to be curious as opposed to critical? What if that was our default? And the second thing is this. I want you to ask the question, what does love require of you? And then I want us to work this week to change our default from critical to curious. Work this week to change the default from constantly being critical and saying, oh, I could get so many likes on Facebook if I post this today. You'll never believe what the lady in front of me did at the grocery store. Like, we could get so many likes and we could have so much self-esteem because people love us. But what if we change the default from critical to curious? What if rather than being critical, we began to be curious and say, what? What does this look like? What is on the other side of me? What is going on in the midst of? Because the truth is, we don't know. And we can be critical of things we don't know, or we can be curious. And I firmly believe that love drives us to be curious. God, we love you. And we thank you so much for the fact that you are a big God. And God, I thank you for the simple truth that God, Jesus embodied and then Paul lived out, that we are called to be known not by what we put on social media, not by the sharp responses that we have in struggles, but we are called to be known by the way we love. And God, may we be reminded that it doesn't mean that we don't have a backbone, but it means that we love. It means that we're curious. It means that we are more concerned with making a difference than making a point. And so, God, I ask, collectively, God, I pray that you would help us. You would help us, Father, to be curious. Father, you would help us to turn the default from criticism to curiosity. And God, I pray that over the course of the next week that we would ask the question time and time again, what does love require of me? God, we thank you. God, we thank you for Betty Perot. We thank you for the school, the facility, the teachers. God, we thank you for what you've allowed us to do here. God, may we not take it for granted, but may we be remarkable stewards. And may we go from here and continue to be for North Tarrant. Because, God, you are. So may we live your ethic out. It is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Amen.